Well, the fight or flight response is something that we encounter as a reaction whenever there's a perceived threat against our lives. It was first described by a man called Walter Cannon. And I feel that when we look at this account of the garden and the events there and the response of the disciples, and then Peter later in the courtyard of Caiaphas, the high priest, we see both fight and flight. Peter, gets a hard press. Sometimes we pin on Peter all the things that we see wrong in our own lives, all the things that we don't like about ourselves. We pin onto him. And maybe it's a way of making ourselves feel better. So it is true that Peter here was the first one to draw his sword and cut off this poor guy's ear, this man who came to arrest him. And John records that in chapter 18, verse 10 of his gospel. And so there is the first instinct that we find, to fight when we're cornered. And that happens to all of us. In a good way. It maybe reflected Peter's commitment to Jesus. And I suppose in some respects it reflected his love for Jesus as well. He wanted to protect Jesus. He wanted to keep him safe. He wondered how he could do that. But when we read this, we wonder, what was his motive beyond that? Did he, as some people believe, expect Jesus to lead a revolution? Did he have a sword for that purpose? Who knows? These are questions to which we have no positive answers in Scripture. And yet what cannot be denied is this first response. The first response of Peter was to lash out in a violent way. Now there may be times when we are angry, when Jesus is lampooned, for example, when he is vilified or when he is denied, or even when his cause is opposed. But violence is no proper course of action, any more than a violent outburst is acceptable in bad language and all the rest. Now, hard as it may be to contain our emotions, fight is our first response, but it is not the way of Jesus. For Luke records in chapter 22, verse 51, that Jesus touched the man's ear and healed him. Now, Mark doesn't tell us about that, but there might be a sense of rebuke for Peter here in Jesus' words that Mark does record when this posse of people come to arrest Jesus in the garden. Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? You see, even at this stage, the disciples didn't really understand what was unfolding before their very eyes. They didn't understand, even though Jesus had warned them about it many times. Well, fight hadn't worked. But the adrenaline nonetheless was still pumping. So what was left for Peter and the others to do except flight? And that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what we read about. And so here the sorry event is recorded by Mark in just a few words, a few devastating words. Then everyone deserted him and fled. It wasn't just Peter. Everyone, they all scarpered. Urgent, desperate flight. And now at last they realised what was coming up. Well, we're going to pause at that point and we're going to break just as we listen to another piece of music. These words were written way back in the 17th century by a man called Samuel Crossman, but they're sung today by Fernando Ortega.